Welcome to the Talegate Podcast with your host, Al Blanton. At Talegate, we celebrate the rich history of sports in the state of Alabama. So come with us as we relive great moments, great games, great players and coaches, and in the process, preserve memories for a lifetime.
One thing is, so I have not been coaching in a long time. I retired from coaching in 2009, but I've got a 6-year-old basketball or 6-year-old, and he's playing 6 and under basketball. And we were in the Final Four of our wall win tournament last night, and we got beat. And so coming off of that, I don't know if you heard about that in California, but I mean, we just got beat in the wall win tournament. There were waterworks, tears were flowing. I'm coming off of this as we're getting ready for this interview.
That's fun stuff. Too bad you lost, but it's still fun.
Yeah. You know, it really is impeccable timing from our production staff, and we've got the former Alabama basketball coach on our podcast the day before perhaps the biggest game in Alabama Auburn series history. Coach, what are your thoughts about this game and also each team in particular? Alabama and Auburn are both having great years. What's your take?
Well, I'm excited for Alabama's program, and obviously, I've known Bruce Pearl forever as well, and Nate, and I've had them both on my podcast, and talk to those guys both regularly. But I tell you what I like about it, and all of the players that have ever played at Alabama, the coaches. We all kind of share in the same thought that, Alabama basketball has been really good at times, over the course of a 20 or 30-year period. There's been a few lulls, but overall, really good. And you're always fighting for, the attention of the people in the state of Alabama. And, every now and then, like when our team went to the Elite Eight or we won the 2002 championship, and even when I played for Coach Sanderson, there were moments where we kind of captured everybody's attention in the state for the sport of basketball. And so this game, and I'm happy for both schools. I'm excited about the game, but I'm really excited because I think even nationally it creates a perception that basketball in the state of Alabama is really good, and it has been good for a long time. But sometimes it takes a game like this, or Alabama making a Final Four, and hopefully they can make a run even deeper this year and have a chance to win it all. But those type of things, they elevate everything in regard to basketball, and so I'm excited for that, for the state and for both programs. But obviously, for Alabama and for Nate Oates, rooting for those guys really hard, obviously.
I've said this before, has the epicenter, it may be too early to say this, but has the epicenter of college basketball shifted a little bit from Duke, Carolina, NC State, that sort of Tobacco Road, place, to the state of Alabama now?
Well, here's what I think. Every time something like this happens, it's like when our team went to the Elite Eight, and last year Nate's team goes to the Final Four, and Bruce has had a great run at Auburn. Every time something like that is accomplished, it's like one more step up the ladder, just one more step up the ladder. And, having coached at NC State for 6 years, and, the difference, obviously, with like the Carolinas and Dukes, and, I was at UCLA 7 years, is the national championships. And it's not just one of them either. It's a bunch of them. And, I think so, I don't know if we're there yet at Alabama and Auburn, but every time something of this kind of magnitude happens, it just creeps it one more level up. Now, obviously, at some point, if Alabama can win a national title, or if Auburn can win one, it does. That even is another step where people begin to get interested more in basketball in the state. When I was coaching there in my last couple of years, I was there 11 years. I got kind of grumpy about it, and I didn't handle it very well because, we had been to the Elite Eight. We had been ranked #1 in the country. And, I'm fighting to get carpet in my locker room. They won't even give me carpet, and so I didn't handle it very well. But anyway, every time something great happens it just inches basketball up that ladder one more notch. And so that's why I'm excited for, where Alabama is and obviously where Auburn is too, both of them at the same time.
I want to come back to Alabama in just a minute, but you've started a really cool thing. You're out in California now. You've been doing a podcast, and it's called the Coach Mark Gottfried Show, and you've had some really unbelievable guests. When I look at your guest list and I watch some of your videos, Kiki Vandeweghe, Bruce Pearl, Jimbo Fisher, Bruce Arians, Dabo Sweeney, Eric Dickerson, just to name a few. You know, who has been out of the people that you've interviewed kind of a surprising interview, one that you really
Thank you.
enjoyed?
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. I have had a really great time doing the show. And when I started doing it, I kind of stumbled into it. And I really want to bring out the stories of how successful people became successful. A lot of times, we look up and you see a coach like Dabo, and now we know Dabo's story being in the state of Alabama, but like Bruce Arians and, I've had Jim and John Harbaugh, both Super Bowl, guys that have been in Super Bowls, and Cedric the Entertainer was my very first guest. And I love to bring out their stories about, the chances they took. Sometimes it's against the odds and they have the courage enough to take a job or, just take that step. And a lot of people sometimes are afraid of that. And so I love to bring that out about them. I don't know if there's been, a guy here and there. Jim Abbott, the baseball pitcher, pitched for the Yankees, pitched a no-hitter with one arm. How about that? Born with just kind of right there above his elbow there. But he was amazing. His story was amazing. I think they've all been great. So I don't know if there's just one guy. I just shot two last week that will be released soon with Lee Steinberg, who's Patrick Mahomes' agent, has had 8 overall #1 picks in the draft, and he's kind of making a resurgence as an agent. Colin Cowherd, I filmed with him yesterday, does the Colin Cowherd show for 3 hours every morning on Fox, and everybody has a story, and they're all interesting. And you find along the way that, they had resilience, they've been knocked down, they found a way to get back up. And so that's what I like. That's what I enjoy about the podcast more than anything.
Is that what made you decide to start the podcast in the first place?
It's a great story, Al. I had moved to Newport Beach. My sister from Mobile was out visiting, and I pulled in. I had a flat tire, and I was getting my tires changed, and the guy said, well, it's going to be about an hour and a half. And so we walked down the street and had a sandwich, and then I walked across the street, and there was a little thing that said podcast studio. I had no interest, or I just walked in and met the guys, and they recognized my name and then encouraged me like, hey, coach, you ought to start a podcast. And so I just kind of did. And it has grown now. Our numbers are really good. People are watching all over the country. And then I've been really lucky to have some amazing, wonderful guests that, they give up their time. And, a lot of them drive from LA down to Newport, which is about an hour. It's a schlep through traffic. And so I'm very appreciative. But anyway, it's I just kind of fell into it. And it's something that I have really, really enjoyed doing.
That's cool. Let's go all the way back now. Let's go all the way back to Crestline, Ohio. And I want you to paint us a picture of life in Crestline where you grew up in the 70s and 80s.
Well, when I was young, my father was a high school basketball coach, and then he became a small college coach at Ashland College, little school in North Central Ohio. At that time they were Division III. And so I just kind of grew up in the gym, and I've always been around sports. And a lot of people know that Jim and John Harbaugh, they're my cousins, and our dads are actually our grandmothers are sisters. And so we've always just grown up around sports. And then my dad had an opportunity to become the head basketball coach at Southern Illinois University. A lot of people forget that. He was only there a couple years. And when he got fired, he was like we all get fired at some point, but he wasn't sure what he wanted to do. And we actually took a trip to Naples, Florida. He was going to go into real estate of all things. And then he got the opportunity at South Alabama. Cliff Ellis was the basketball coach and the athletic director. He hired my dad as the assistant athletic director. We moved to Mobile, 1981, summertime. And then a year later, Cliff took the job at Clemson. And so he left, and my dad was able to become the athletic director there at South Alabama. And he stayed as the AD for 28 years, which is unbelievable. And he's in 5 Hall of Fames. How about that? My dad is unbelievable. But anyway, that's what brought us to Mobile. But, growing up in Ohio, I was young, shoveling snow in the wintertime, following the Buckeyes. We loved the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Ohio State Buckeyes way back then. But it was a great, great childhood. And I'm so thankful. I was always around sports. My dad's brother, Mike, was the head football coach as a high school coach. Then he became the coach at Cincinnati and Kansas and Pitt, and then worked for ESPN. So anyway, I was very lucky and very fortunate to be around that kind of atmosphere all the time.
I've gotten to know Mike through his work with Team Focus. Mike and I have become friends, and I was able to go down to Mobile and speak for a Team Focus event. So, and I actually went to North Carolina, went to Raleigh, and was on a TV show at Mike's request. So he's been a good friend for a long time now, and I think very highly of him. So great guy.
He's the best. And, for me, I always tell people this story. My Uncle Mike, and I was in my dad's locker rooms as a young kid, just grabbing towels, and, I'd hang around and, just do whatever, when you're a young person. But I can remember when my Uncle Mike, my dad's brother, Mike Gottfried, was the head football coach at Murray State. This would have been about 78 or 79, somewhere in that era. And I was probably, 14 years old. And I remember walking into the locker room, in a football locker room, with 100 guys, shoulder pads, helmets, the whole thing. It was 100 guys all in a big circle holding hands, and they were singing the song Love Lifted Me. And I can remember sitting there as this young person saying, I want to coach. I want to coach one day. My dad was a coach, but when you see the impact,
Yeah.
Especially, my dad, my uncle, and Jack Harbaugh was a coach growing up. I always looked up to Jack, Jim and John's father. But just kind of being all around that, it just got me excited that, hey, I want to have a chance to do that too one day, where I can have an impact on young people. So again, very, very lucky, very fortunate the way I was able to grow up.
You finish high school at UMS Prep, now UMS Wright. You go to Oral Roberts for a year, and then you come to Alabama. And I've got to know Coach Sanderson across the years, and I've heard a lot of things from his perspective, which is always a very unique perspective. But from your perspective, what was it like playing for Coach Sanderson?
I loved every minute of it. Coach Sanderson was tough. He was hard. And, a lot of people saw that gruff exterior, and that scowl on the sideline. And, but he's just a wonderful, wonderful person. And sometimes it takes you until you're older in life to just look back, and then you realize the lessons that you learned. Coach Sanderson kept things really simple. We didn't have a complicated offense. It wasn't that type of thing, but boy, you better play hard. And if you didn't play hard, you weren't going to play, period. End of story. And we were able to have some great teams at Alabama, some really talented teams. And I think kind of the start, really, because if you think about that era, 83 to 87, I was there, and Derek McKee and Jim Farmer and Buck Johnson and Bobby Lee Hurt and Terry Conner, that group. But right after us, and, I've had Robert Ory on my podcast, and Robert talked about, he was in high school while we were having those 3 straight Sweet 16s, and we were, a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament in 87. And so you had guys like Robert, Eric Washington, James Hollywood, Robinson, Jason Caffey, Antonio McDice. Those guys came right after us. But those guys grew up watching us. They watched our teams play, and it kind of elevated basketball a little bit. And then I think Wimp had those couple more years where they even had some unbelievable talent. So anyway, I loved it. I loved playing for Coach. And I'll tell you this quick story. Last year I flew into Nashville. I picked Jim Farmer up. He was living in Nashville at the time. We got in the car and drove to Birmingham. And we wanted to take Coach Sanderson to lunch, and we did. And we had a little barbecue, and afterwards we went back to his house, and we sat there, and we thought we might be there for a half hour, but we sat there for about 4 hours, and we talked about everything, and we talked about the teams we had, and it was just a magical day. And I can remember we walked out of the front door, probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and he started to cry, and we started to cry. And so, you realize later when you get older how significant people are in your lives, which he was for us. So he was fantastic.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, he's got such a rugged like exterior, but then if you can just kind of get past that, there's a tenderness about him, and I've done several interviews with him and several articles, and he's always helpful. Now you may have to catch a little bit for a minute there, but then once you get past that facade, he's really a very, very kind person.
He's wonderful. And even playing for him, people sometimes, even my parents or my sister, they'd say, God, he's terrible. And but they never really saw the other sides. They didn't see the practices, and he cared about it. He loved Alabama. And he went through a difficult time when he left, and I did too. We both stubbed our toes. But I remember when I got the job at Alabama, and I put together a reunion, kind of a alumni game in Coleman Coliseum, and I invited everybody back, and we had them all there, and Leon Douglas, and Wendell, and T.R. Dunn, and all the guys, and it meant a lot to him, to Coach Sanderson, because when you're fired, it's hard sometimes to come back into that gym. You're embarrassed, you've been beat down a little bit. And I remember just trying my best, like, Coach, come to the games. I want you around. I want you around all the time. I want you here. And he began to, little by little, but it was hard for him. And I understand. After I became the coach there for 11 years, and they made a decision to fire me, which I probably put the bullets in the gun. But I had a period where I didn't want to go back. I did not want to step in that gym. And they honored one of our teams, the 87 team. And I remember Coach Sanderson calling me and like, Mark, I need you to come. And I said, Coach, I'm not coming. I'm not coming in there. Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad I did. Mm-hmm. And it was because of him. And I went back there because of him. So anyway, yeah, he's got that gruff exterior, but people that know him like you and I, he's a big, tender-hearted guy.
Yeah. I bet it was cool for him, for a former player, to kind of pass on the tradition of Alabama basketball. And Alabama basketball has had a great tradition throughout the years. What is it like for you now that Oates is having the kind of success that you had? I mean, you're a part of that. I mean, you were a big part of transmitting Alabama basketball to the next person. How does that feel for you that Alabama's having the kind of success that they're having?
I'm so excited for him and for the program, and all the players are too. We talk all the time, and we have some text threads going between our groups, and our guys are excited because we've all been kind of fighting hard for the game of basketball in the state. And I think Nate, I tell people this all the time, he has taken it to another level. And obviously last year, you made a Final Four. We got close. We were a game away in 2004 and had to play that really good UConn team. And we thought we had a chance to get there. But I think last year, that breakthrough, when you break through and do it for the first time, it was emotional. It was special. And so nobody is rooting for those guys harder than me. People sometimes forget that, when you're the coach there for 11 years, and that's a long time, 11 years, you pour your heart into it, like everything, every ounce of your soul I poured into that program. And I did it as a player too. I wore the jersey. And so from a player's perspective, and then later as a coach's perspective, there's a lot of emotion there. And so what Nate has done has been spectacular. And they got a really, really good team, although So does Auburn. But anyway, I'm excited for where the program is, and hopefully they can keep taking those steps along the way and maybe have a chance to win it all. That'd be spectacular. It'd be so much fun.
What makes it so difficult to get to that next level? Because, up until you took Alabama to the Elite Eight, the team had only made it to the Sweet 16. What is it about the tournament itself and just the inherent difficulty of it that makes it hard to get to that next level?
I think, Al, that sometimes it's a little bit of luck, and sometimes it's your matchup. You get in that tournament, and anything can happen. Like anything can happen on a given night. It's one game. It's not like the pros where it's a best of 7 or best of 5. And so sometimes, you get fortunate and the ball bounces your way. The year we went to the Elite Eight, we had to beat Southern Illinois on a buzzer beater. People forget that. Antoine Petway made a buzzer beater. And then we had to play Stanford, who was number 1 in the country at 30-1 was their record. And after that, it was Syracuse, who was defending national champions. And then we played UConn. Sometimes it's a matchup. You may end up with a great matchup. Like, I'll give you an example. Last year, I think Alabama had a legitimate chance to win it all, except for UConn. UConn was really good. I mean, they were just they were a little bit like the team we played in 04. They were good enough to win it all. So the more you're there, if you get in the tournament a lot, that ball is going to bounce your way. A shot's going to go in, or maybe it's an opponent missing the shot at the buzzer. You just never know. And so just the more times you're in it, I think the odds begin to get in your favor a little bit. And you got to be good enough too, which I thought Alabama was last year. And I think they're good enough this year to make a great run like that again.
I want to come back to Alabama in just a second, but while you were still a player, you start fanning out letters. You said you always knew you wanted to be a coach. You start fanning out letters to coaches all across the country. And out of all the programs that you send out letters to, who comes a calling but UCLA? Do you ever just kind of sit there and think like, you know what? Providence was smiling down on me at that moment.
I was so fortunate and I'm so lucky when I look back. And a lot of people don't know this story, and I'll share it with you right now. I was playing for Athletes in Action that year. I started sending out a ton of letters. I was engaged to be married in that August of '88. And I got a call from the Pistons to play in the LA Pro Summer League. And at that time, it's now in Las Vegas, but back in that era, they played at Loyola Marymount. So I was playing for Detroit in the Summer League with Dennis Rodman and a bunch of other guys, young guys at that time. And Coach Sanderson offered me the job to be the graduate assistant at Alabama. And that was exciting for me. But at the very same time, I go back to my hotel room one night, and that little red blinking light is on the light is on the phone. We didn't have cell phones back then. And I called, and my mom said, "Hey, there was this Jim Herrick from UCLA called," because I had sent letters to everybody in the country. And so what I did is I just woke up in the next morning. I grabbed a cab. There was no Ubers or anything back then. And I got in a cab, and I took off to UCLA. And I walked in his office, shook his hand, and he looked at me like, "What are you doing?" I called yesterday. I just called your mom, or I called your house. And it began the process for me with Coach Herrick. And he eventually offered me that position as well, to be a graduate assistant. And I knew in my heart that if you can connect your name to a school like UCLA, it just kind of puts you on this fast track, which it did. We were able to win the national championship in '95. I was getting offered jobs left and right at that point, and I was lucky to get the job at Murray State. So anyway, it was definitely one of those things that it kind of fell my way, and I wanted to take advantage of that opportunity.
I didn't realize this, but you're 34 when you got the Alabama job.
Yep.
34.
33, I think. I think I was 33.
33, yeah.
Yep,
I mean, I know you played at Alabama, but what's your mentality when you take over that program? I mean, you're still a young guy.
Yeah. Well, you got to think back now, and I'll say this. I hope I say this the right way. I was a cocky young dude, man. I knew I was going to conquer the world, and I was going to do it fast. And now that I'm 61 years old, I look back and go, God, I mean, it would have been way better for me to get that job at 42 or 43 than 33. What did I know? And if you think back at that time when I took the job at Alabama, my first year, Auburn was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Chris Porter, he was on the cover, and they were preseason by Sports Illustrated, number one. LSU was rolling. Arkansas had just won a championship. Kentucky was rolling. Rick Stansberry was kind of brand new like me, and we were going to fight to the death, over every guy, he and I. And then eventually Florida became really good with Billy Donovan, and then Georgia became good. And the league today is unbelievably good. But I tell people, back in that, 98, 99, 2000, the league was pretty good. I mean, it was really good with great players. LSU used to walk in the gym at Tuscaloosa, and I thought I was playing against the New York Knicks, the way they looked. And so we had great teams, but I was young. I didn't know any better. I was challenging everybody. I was fighting with everybody. I was fighting with John Brady. I was fighting with Stansberry. I had a great relationship with Cliff Ellis, who did an amazing job at Auburn. But in Tennessee was really good. So anyway, it was a great time. I was just young and dumb and trying my best, to keep my head above the water in a league that was really, really good, and I was really young.
So there was no trepidation with you whatsoever when you took that job. It was like, let's go.
Yeah, and I'll tell you another story that people will enjoy this. I was at Murray State. We had 3 really good years. In my last year at Murray State, we were 29-4. We had beaten Arkansas and Iowa State down in Puerto Rico. We went on the road and beat Dayton. We rolled through that league. I had a bunch of good Alabama kids on my team. And then the Alabama job opens up. And the year before that, after my second year at Murray State, both Georgia and Tennessee offered me the jobs, and I turned them down, waiting on Alabama. I wanted to be the coach at Alabama. And I remember meeting with the athletic director, Bob Bockrath, in Nashville. We met at the airport. And quite honestly, truth be told, I don't know that I was his first choice. I think probably the fans were excited to have me, but he gave me an offer that was really probably so low that it was almost what Murray State was going to pay me. And I was crushed. And I went back to Murray and hell, I about cried because I wanted to be there so bad. And the guy that got me over the hump was Mal Moore. Mal was the assistant director at the time, athletic director. And Mal kind of talked me through all that. And eventually, Bob Bockrath made a little bit nicer offer. But I almost turned it down because I felt like I was going to get offered the Arizona State job. I had been at UCLA in the West. But anyway, it all worked out. And I'm glad that I kind of hung in there. And but the key in that whole thing was Mal Moore. A lot of people don't know that. And, Mal was so good to me. But that's when our relationship started, he and I. And we had a great relationship all the way until he passed away.
And he had a hand in bringing another coach in about 7 years later that did a pretty decent job with the football program.
And Al, I tell people I could write a book because I don't know if Mal just felt comfortable with me and our relationship, but I talked to Mal Moore every day, about 3 times a day through that entire process when he hired Nick Saban. And he was sitting in that hotel in Miami. He would call and people forget the old Rich Rodriguez, that he took the job and then turned it down. And so Mal, I tell people I could write a book on how that process really kind of went down. And at the time, Jimmy Sexton was my agent and Jimmy was Nick's agent. And so, there was a lot of talk back and forth and trying to figure things out and from their camp. But there was nobody that I've ever worked with or for that was as good as Mal Moore, period. Like end of story. You talk about a guy that had a heart of gold now and wanted Alabama to win and be good. And, the success that Nick Saban had there, obviously Nick Saban is, will go down as maybe the greatest 1-2, him and Bear Bryant, but he's right there, maybe the best. But Mal Moore deserves the credit, period. End of story. It's not close. And Mal gave Nick Saban everything he asked for on the front end. Everything from hiring coaches and increasing salaries for assistant coaches and facilities. And um, so, those national championships and the success they've had in football, it ain't happening without Mal Moore, period. It's just not happening. So anyway, I have a great love for Mal and loved my time there with him.
It's funny that we bring this up because I used to write for a SEC football website called Saturday Down South, and my very first article that I wrote for them was called 38 Days: How Alabama Pulled Off the Great Heist of Nick Saban. And I chronicled from when Shula was fired to when Saban was hired. I tried to walk through that whole process. I should have called you, man. Now that I think about the people I should have asked, I should have called you. But it was a very interesting research project, and to your point, I mean, it was credit to Mal Moore. The article was about the tenacity and the perseverance of Mal Moore. So,
And not only the hiring of Nick Saban, but I think Mal had the wherewithal.
mhm.
And when Nick first got in there, he was kind of rough and tough, and he's kind of mellowed throughout the years. But Mal could see if he hired the right guy. And you got to remember, I tell people this too all the time. I was the basketball coach at Alabama for 11 years. And in an 11-year period, we had 5 head coaches. I mean, think about that. 5 head coaches in 11 years. And, it was Mike DuBose, Dennis Franchione, then Mike Price came in, then Mike Shula, then Nick Saban. But Mal had the wisdom, and he could look down the road and basically say, if I give Nick Saban everything he needs, I'm talking about salaries to hire the right guys, creating positions. We had more strength coaches at the beginning than I've ever seen in my life. More high school coaches were becoming strength coaches at Alabama, and facilities, all those things. And Mal Moore was able to see it and, give Nick Saban a lot. And then obviously Nick was so good, he just did an amazing job. But without the administration and the direction from Mal, it may not have happened like the way it did because Mal had that wisdom and foresight.
What's the dynamic like between the basketball coach at Alabama and the football coach at Alabama? Do they see each other a lot? Do they talk a lot? Do they talk coaching philosophy? What was it like for you?
I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I got to know all of them really, really well. I was, with Mike DuBose, and then, obviously Mike Shula and I, our 4 years as players, as student athletes, were the same 4 years. So I've known Mike since we were, he was down the hall in the old Bryant Hall where we were living. Dennis Franchione was fabulous. I loved them all. They were all great, and we had great relationships with all of them. And then obviously when they hired Nick, but I sat in Mike Price's office, just he and I, nobody else. And when all that went down in Pensacola, and which obviously Alabama made a decision to terminate him. He and I probably had 100 conversations. I sat there and he kind of bared his soul to me. And I really, really loved that guy. I really did. He was a genuinely wonderful, warm person. And, obviously made a mistake like we all do in life. But, the relationship I had with all of them was fantastic. And the assistant coaches. I'm still really close to Dabo to this day. Dabo and I are really great friends. And it helped that I was at NC State and he was at Clemson, and our spring meetings were always together, football and basketball. But I've always had, and maybe because of my Uncle Mike, who was a football coach, I've had great relationships with all of those guys, and I was rooting for every one of them to do well and to win. And obviously when Nick got in there, it went to a whole new level. But I always had great relationships with those guys.
I've been an Alabama fan my whole life. I don't try to hide that, but I mean, Alabama can be so critical of former coaches, even former players sometimes. And I've had an opportunity to meet Coach Dubose many times, and he has been so gracious. I mean,
Yes.
it's such a nice,
Yep.
kind person, and I feel like Alabama, needs to forgive him at some level. you
Oh,
know.
there's no question. And it's the old when you live in a glass house, be careful, throw some stones
Yeah.
because, usually, most people, not everybody, but a lot of people, they've put their foot in a bear trap themselves. And, when you're in a public position, and I was in that public position and I made some mistakes, but, a lot of people think they know the story and they really don't know the story. They don't really know. They know what they read, they know what they hear. And like Mike, like you said, Mike DuBose was he just was a really great person. I enjoyed every minute. He lived down the street from me in Crown Point, our neighborhood. He was right about 4 houses away, and so I'd see him all the time at night. And so anyway, it's tough when you're in it in a public profession, and I hated it for him. I hated it for Mike Price. I did. I thought Mike Price would have been really, really good coach at Alabama, and I had known a lot of people that knew him at Washington State. Uh, but things happen in life,
Yeah.
and mistakes happen, and anyway, you kind of keep moving on from them.
Yeah. My theme song needs to be Greg Allman's "I'm No Angel." So yeah,
We could all use that song. And
absolutely.
a lot of people don't want to look in the mirror. They love to look somewhere else. And it's fun too to talk about, hey, I heard this and I heard that. And
Yeah.
there were so many things when I was there. I was like, that one's true, but that's not true.
Yeah.
And so I used to tell people the only people that really know is me. I know the truth, and I'm a big boy and can handle it. But it is difficult sometimes when you're in those public positions.
When I think about that era of basketball, though, let's go back to that. One of the greatest moments in Alabama basketball history was that 2002 game against Florida. Petway makes the walk-off layup.
Yeah.
When it comes to all-time moments in your basketball career, where does that rank?
Oh, it's up there. There's no question. It's up there. I've seen that last few seconds of that game many, many times. And, Darren Boatwright was my director of basketball operations. And, Darren later became the athletic director at Wichita State, and dear, dear friend of mine. But, right at that moment, just turning in like that hug, that he and I had, and our players too, and I was so happy for the players. And it's almost sometimes if you look back, and you look at Antoine's story, Antoine Petway, and you think of that shot he made, and you think of his story. I'm not sure I've ever coached somebody that kind of overcame the odds more than him. And so for him to make that shot against Florida 2002, it was almost like fate. You look back, it's like a fairy tale. It really is like a fairy tale for a guy that I can remember going to his school last day of April after his senior year, at the end of the recruiting period, and we were a kind of a guard short. They had won the state championship. His father was the high school coach.
Is this Wilcox Central?
Wilcox Central, 4.0 GPA. I mean, he's got everything. And he had two offers at the time. It was Alabama A&M and Alabama State. And I remember we went to the library and we sat down, and he leaned across that table, man. He was so ready for me to say the word scholarship. That's all he wanted to hear. And I told him, I want you to be a walk-on. And you'd have thought I took a pin and popped a bubble. And I said, but if you prove it to me, Pet, I'll give you a scholarship. I promise you. And then his freshman year, we stuck him in a game early on. And next thing you know, it's like, God, I don't want to take him out. He's that kind of player. And I can remember at the end of the year, his dad called me, Joe Petway, and Joe said, Coach, I want to thank you. You believe in my son, and you gave him a scholarship. He said, you didn't realize this, Coach, but I had to sell 2 cows just so I could pay for his freshman tuition last year. But he's amazing. But that night and him making that shot, and what an amazing game. Florida was so good back then with Billy Donovan and the players they had. Good golly, some of the talent that they had at Florida. So that would rank up there as one of the great, great moments of my athletic career.
Let's talk 03-04 season. I mean, when you think about players on that team, you think about Kennedy Winston, Ernest Shelton, obviously Petway. But really, the player that comes to mind for me is Chuck Davis, and I want to get this right. He has 19 points against Syracuse, 24 points against UConn. How critical was Davis during that whole stretch?
Unbelievable. And, they honored one of our teams. I think it was that team last year or the year before. And I flew back to Tuscaloosa. And you have to remember, people forget this too. And we joked about it. Chuck told me, said, Coach, with the new rules, with the portal, I'd have been gone after my freshman year. And because he did not play much at all as a freshman. And matter of fact, I told Chuck this story. He knows the story. Christmas time came of his freshman year, and Chuck was a little pouty, and he wasn't very mature at that point, and you know, he wasn't doing very well. And I remember telling the coaches at Christmas time, I said, if Chuck Davis tells any one of you that he's going to transfer, don't you dare talk him out of it. Let him go. I mean, that was my position with him. And then his sophomore year, I brought in Tom Asbury as an assistant coach, and Tom Asbury really connected with Chuck. Tom was so good with big guys. And we opened up the season in the Garden in his sophomore year. And I think we played Pitt, and I think he had something like 24 and 12. It was ridiculous. And Chuck Davis just kept getting better and better and better and better. He just kept improving until that run to the Elite Eight. He was so good. He was so good in the first two games. We had to play Southern Illinois and Stanford. And Chuck Davis, boy, his footwork and how he improved as a player was just special. So, yeah, he was a big-time part of that run to the Elite Eight.
You beat Syracuse, and then you got to face UConn. And, I mean, UConn is absolutely loaded. I mean, Emeka Okafor, Ben Gordon, you had Charlie Villanueva. I mean, how do you get past that team?
Well, here's a great story. We beat Syracuse. We're in Phoenix, Arizona, and we come back to the hotel, the Sweet 16 game, and we're excited. I mean, our old team's excited, and, now we're in the Elite Eight, first ever Elite Eight for Alabama. And we had a room set up that had all our video stuff in there. Back then it was VCRs and, that type of stuff. And so we had a room that we could keep everything in. And so after with the meal, I walked in the room, and Tom Asbury, my assistant, was sitting there watching film of UConn and their game. And he looked at me and he said, "You want the good news or the bad news?" I said, "Well, give me the good news." He said, "Well, we're in the Elite Eight." I said, "Well, that's good. What's the bad news?" He said, "We got no shot against these guys. They're too good." They were, I think they had 9 pros. There were 9 guys that eventually played in the NBA on that roster, and they had kind of rolled through the tournament. Their average mark, I think they had one close game. It might have been the semifinal game in the Final Four, but they rolled through the tournament, and they were really good. And I've told people this one. I think last year with Nate Oates' team, if they play anybody other than UConn,
Yeah.
I think they're probably in the national championship game. And I tell people, go back to 2004, Georgia Tech made the Final Four that year. I think it was Oklahoma State. If we had been in another bracket and, playing against one of those teams in the Elite Eight, I think we have a real shot, going to Final Four. But UConn was just too powerful. They were just too many weapons and size and scoring. And, so anyway, that would end up being a tough night for us.
And during that time, I mean, you're still a young guy. I mean, you're still a young coach. So what's it like for you going up against Jim Boeheim, and then, let's turn right back around. Now we got to face Jim Calhoun. I mean, come on.
I loved it. I mean, I loved that competition. And, again, I was so young, probably didn't know any better. But I went to a Coaches versus Cancer golf tournament about a month or two after that game. And I'm sitting there with Jim Boeheim, who's become he's a great friend. He's a great, great guy. And Syracuse had already played UConn 3 times. I think they played twice in the regular season. I think they played in the Big East tournament. And Jim Boeheim said to me, he said, "Boy, you guys made a great run." He said, "But I'm going to be real honest." He said, "We wanted to win. We wanted to beat you, obviously, but we knew we weren't going to beat them either." So, it was one of them where he said it was just that they were that good. And anyway, but I loved going against those guys. And, you go back to the SEC at that time, Rick Stansberry and I, we joke about it now. If either one of us was allowed to, if either one of us could have gone and bought a gun, we'd have shot each other. There wouldn't have been any doubt. John Brady was the same way. But as we all get older, we've all, kind of buried all that stuff, and we're really good friends with all of them. But at that time, you're fighting for your position. You're fighting to establish yourself as a young head coach in the SEC, and so that's the way I looked at it.
You've had some former players that have gone on to do some really great things, and the way you and I got to talking is, I reached out to you about giving us a quote about Richard Hendricks, who we're doing an article on in our magazine, and for you to see guys like Richard, guys like Mo Williams, Petway, Irwin Dudley, staying in the game, what does that mean to you?
That means a lot. And you mentioned Richard Hendricks. He, as we all know, and you know him, and people around Alabama know him. You talk about a beautiful young person, like beautiful guy. What, you know, uh, intelligent, got great character. And, I had him on my podcast, and I do believe that he is a star in the making with television. He's got everything you'd ever want to be really, really good at television. He can articulate his thoughts and deliver them to the audience in a way that, they can understand what's happening. So I'm really proud of Richard, really excited for his career. Uh, I look at Irwin Dudley. He's kind of hung around there. He's back at Tuscaloosa, and to have Irwin around those players for what he did as an SEC Player of the Year. Irwin and I had dinner in Istanbul, Turkey, when he was playing in Turkey, and I was recruiting a player. I was at NC State, but he's just another guy like that. You're talking about best of the best as far as people go. And then, Mo Williams and Pet, I watched them both this year. I went out and watched Antoine Petway's team. They came out and played here in California. And both those two guys, God, what a great job they're both doing. Unbelievable. And so it really, as a coach, you feel great about it. You want those guys to have success. And we have a lot of guys that aren't in sports that are doing amazing things as well, too. And so it makes you feel really good as a coach that, I've got that relationship with those guys.
I'm a big stadium guy. I like stadiums. I like to go to stadiums. I like to go to games. I like to kind of notice the environment around the stadium. When you were coaching at Alabama, what was an away environment or away stadium that you thought, man, this is a tough environment. We got to go play these guys again at their home place. I know obviously Rupp is
Yeah.
a big game, but
Yeah.
for you, what was kind of the toughest venue?
When you look in the SEC, when I was there, Florida, they had it rolling. And Florida and their athletic director, they were a little bit ahead of the game. They had went baseline to baseline, the full length of the court. Those first probably, I don't know, 20 rows was all students. And they had everything orchestrated. They had the chomps and the songs and how they're going to clap and cheer, and they were probably ahead of the game as far as building an environment that was really, really hard to play in, really hard. And also he had great players, and Billy did a great job coaching. So you put all that together. That was probably the hardest. Rupp, for me, it was interesting. I went into Rupp as a player my senior year, Jim Farmer and I and a bunch of guys, and Rex Chapman was a freshman, and we beat him in there. And then 2 times as a head coach, we went into Rupp and beat him. I think Mo Williams was so great and spectacular that 2001 year we went up there and beat him in Rupp. But everywhere we went, Mississippi State was a tough place to play, especially with the rivalry that I think it's, well documented that, Rick and I, we were at each other's throats too, and that probably helped. But the environment, I think, at Florida
Yeah.
probably stood out then more than anywhere else,
And you've won at Cameron Indoor.
which is a special place. I tell people this, and I'm not trying to be boastful about it, but I've taken teams and we've won in the Dean Dome. We've won at Louisville. We've won at Cameron, at Kentucky. Um, Cameron is special too. Now that happened to be, I was very fortunate. That was my 400th win as a head coach. My father was there at the game, sitting right behind me. I mean, you talk about magical night, but um, tough place to play at Cameron.
Tell us about your California experience. We need to wrap up here in a minute, but I do want to, talk about California. You and I are friends on social media. I mean, it really looks like you're living the life and having a great time. And if someone were to, book a trip to that area for a week or two, where would you advise that
Well,
go eat, spend time? What are some places that we need to go?
Well, it's a great question. So I'm a fan of Los Angeles, but Los Angeles is a little tough. There's great parts of LA and there's some tough parts of LA, but I always like Los Angeles. I like the fact there was so much to do in pro sports, college sports, but I live in Newport Beach, and Newport Beach is about 45 minutes south of Los Angeles. And I'll say this, and I tell people this all the time. I can't imagine a nicer place in the world to live than Newport Beach. It's one of those most special places. It's a beautiful environment right on the water. Uh, the marina here is spectacular. There's so much to do. And then the beauty for California that I have fallen in love with, and my kids are all here too. I've got 5 of my own kids, and I'm married now with 3 stepchildren. But and everything's in California. But the weather is such the draw. And we have high taxes, but I tell people my taxes pay for the weather because, it's 72 and sunny with no humidity about 320 days out of the year. And so it's pretty hard to beat that. You're always outside. I play pickleball every day, every morning, 8 o'clock. I'm on the pickleball court. And, but anyway, it's a wonderful place to live. I loved Alabama. I love going back to Mobile and with my parents there and my sister, but California, Newport Beach is a special place.
Give me a good restaurant to go to. Give me a good. Now we came to LA last year for the Alabama Michigan
Yep.
game.
Yep.
My wife and son, and so my son, his first Alabama football game was the Rose Bowl, so he's completely spoiled. We were able to do a stadium tour of Dodger Stadium. We stayed in Beverly Hills, which was a neat experience. But give me some places around the Newport Beach area, or places, a Sunset Drive that maybe we need to go on.
Well, the Crystal Cove is about 5 miles south of Newport, and you're up on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, with the beach down below, and it's just spectacular. There's so many restaurants that are right on the water, Mastro's and Javier's, and all of these places. There's too many to pick from, and there's a little place called The House that we love right here in Newport Beach. We're members there, but it's there's too many to pick from. It's so nice, but the nice thing about here is I walk a lot. I can go down on the boardwalk at the beach and walk forever and ever and ever. There's a little island called Balboa Island. You can walk the perimeter, and it's a great little quaint, cool little island, and
Yeah.
there's just so many. But the great news for Newport Beach is the weather, the sunshine. Hard to beat it. It's really
Yeah.
hard to beat it.
Now, in preparation for this interview, I reached out to the Bryant Museum in Tuscaloosa to get some photos, and you and I talked about this before we got on, so I've prepped you for this. But we have unearthed a photo from your playing days, and I want to talk a little bit about this. Now, is this mousse, or is this hair dryer, or give us a give us
We had Jim Farmer and I. We were making the mullet. We were making the mullet famous back in the mid '80s. But
Tuscaloosa waterfall.
that's it right there. And it was it was fun. It was so fun to be in school back there. I don't know that when you show that picture, I don't think I've changed it. I think I look the same as I did when I was about 22.
I think you look better. I mean,
A lot of miles on these wheels from then till now. So
yeah, absolutely. That's great. So tell us who's coming up on the podcast. Who are some guests that you're going to have coming up?
well, I just
And who's on
filmed
your
obviously.
podcast? Who's
Yeah,
on
I'm
your
sorry.
wish list? Who's on your podcast wish list?
Well, I tell you who I filmed with lately. Richard Hendricks will come out next week. Richard was so good. And then I had Toby Bailey, who played for us at
Yeah.
UCLA, the national champion, had the great game in the championship game in '95. I just filmed 2 days ago with Lee Steinberg, and Lee came in the studio. Lee has 8 overall #1 picks in the NFL draft, and he's making a resurgence. He's got Patrick Mahomes right now, who he represents. And then I had Colin Coward, who does the show on Fox for 3 hours every morning. He was a great guest. And so anyway, I'm gonna keep swinging. I'm trying to get the best of the best and keep it interesting, and predominantly in sports. Although I tell you, I've had some guys outside of sports. My wife, her husband, David Fagenbaum, if anybody hasn't listened to that episode, he found a cure for his own disease. He's a scientist at Penn. He's a doctor there. He's brilliant. Had DJ Caruso, who just filmed and released the show back at Thanksgiving called Mary. He also directed Disturbia and I Am Legend and those kind of movies. And so I've had all kind of folks, but anyway, I'll end up with some good ones. I don't know who's next just yet, but I'll come up with a couple good ones.
Can you get Jordan?
That would be a good one right there. I'm trying right now to get Magic and Kareem. Been a little difficult for me, but I'm swinging. I'm swinging the bat. I'm trying my best to get them.
Hey, man, you never know until you ask.
That's right.
You never know until you ask. Tell us where we can find the podcast.
So everything is at www.coachmarkgottfried.com, and that's my website. And I do a lot of corporate speaking as well, and all that's on there. But then the other thing is, on Spotify and Google and Apple and YouTube. It's all over the place. And hopefully I'm hoping with it that the stories that are being told on the podcast, I hope there's a nugget in there sometimes just for somebody who happens to listen or watch and says, I can identify with that. I'm there right now, and I need to take this step. I need to have the courage to do this thing or go for it in such a way. So I'm hoping that there are people that have been impacted by the stories that these people are telling.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, it's fun to have conversations, but if you can introduce something that's got an eternal element to it, while you're talking to somebody, or somebody can watch something that they can glean a life lesson from it. I mean, that's why you do it.
Well, and it's like when my episode with Lee Steinberg comes out, and Lee and I talked about, he was on top of the world. He made the movie Jerry Maguire. It was about him. Mm-hmm. And, then he had a couple of DUIs, and he kind of hit the bottom and filed for bankruptcy. But now he's coming back and again to land Patrick Mahomes. But there's a lot of stories like that. And people sometimes, you don't know that story about how, somebody took a punch to the gut pretty hard, and you find a way to keep coming back and keep striving for greatness. So I love to bring those stories out with all of the guests and learn their journeys. It's been a great thing.
Yeah. Well, Coach, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you coming on. It's been a blast. It's always fun to take a walk down memory lane, and I just appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and roll Tide roll.
All right, Coach. Thanks so much.
Okay.
And that's a wrap. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Talegate Podcast. And in the meantime, connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. We'll see you next time.